They say when you get old, you become invisible. I used to think that was just a poetic way to describe loneliness. But now, at 75, I know it's not poetic. It's precise. My name is Abigail Hartley. I live in a nursing home called Willow Pines. That name sounds peaceful, doesn't it? Serene, almost. But the truth is, it's just a pretty name for a place where people come to be forgotten. I wasn't always invisible. Once upon a time, I had a house, our house, filled with the smell of Ron's aftershave and my cinnamon apple pie. I had laughter echoing through hallways, Sunday dinners with my son Michel and his young wife Gabrielle, birthday candles, Christmas carols, life. Now I have beige wallpaper, scratchy sheets, and the thin, tinny sound of someone else's television through the walls. Ron's been gone 9 years. Cancer took him quick, but not quick enough to spare us the hollow days and nights before the end. I still wake up sometimes reaching for his hand before remembering that all I have of him now are photos in frames and a dent in the bed beside me that never fills. When we met, Ron was working the docks and I was a secretary at the insurance office down the road. He had thick hands, a crooked smile, and eyes that made you feel seen. He made me feel like I mattered. We built a life with little and turned it into enough. 40 years in that little blue house on Carter Street. That was our world. Now I sit in this sterile room surrounded by strangers with dull eyes and sagging skin, waiting. For what? Meals served on plastic trays? The occasional afternoon bingo? A phone call that doesn't come? Michel visits, sometimes. Maybe once every few months, always in a hurry, always checking his phone. "Just wanted to make sure you're all right, Mom," he says, even as he glances toward the door. His wife Gabrielle never even tries to pretend. She comes only when Michel forces her, stiff-backed and distant, as if my presence might stain her blouse. Gabrielle calls me dear in that brittle way that makes it feel like an insult. She talks to me like I'm a toddler or a malfunctioning appliance. "Are you sure you took your pills, dear?" And looks around the room like she's terrified the upholstery might leap out and bite her. They placed me here, you know, said it was for my own good. Michel had excuses lined up. "You'll have company, Mom. Medical staff nearby, peace of mind." But I saw the relief in his eyes. Saw the way Gabrielle didn't even pretend to disagree. What they didn't know was that I had been planning something. You see, I've never touched the money Ron left me. Not the big account we kept quiet. Not the safe deposit box I still have the key to. Michael thinks I used it all for the house and Ron's treatments. He doesn't know there's $100,000 still tucked away in crisp bills, wrapped in rubber bands and secrets. I never told anyone. Not even Ron, not really. We just said, it's there if we need it. And then we never did. I was going to give it to Michel. Yes, I know, foolish, old-fashioned, but I wanted to feel useful again, like I could still do something that mattered. He'd said something about buying a bigger place, a fixer-upper they could finally call their own. Gabrielle's eyes had lit up in a way I hadn't seen since their wedding. For one dizzy moment, I thought, maybe this gift could bring us back together. Maybe if I gave them something real, something meaningful, they'd see me again. I asked the nurse to help me pack. "Just a weekend visit," I told her. I didn't say I had the money in my handbag, nestled between extra sweaters and my arthritis cream. I didn't say I was going to surprise Michel with it over dinner. The day I left Willow Pines, I stood outside for a long time, just breathing the cold winter air. It bit at my lungs and made my fingers ache, but it reminded me I was still alive, still capable, still here. I took a cab to their house. Michel wasn't home yet, but Gabrielle opened the door, her lipstick fresh, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You should have called first," she said. "No welcome. No hug." "I wanted to surprise you both," I replied, smiling through the tightness in my chest. She stepped aside, reluctantly, and I walked in, clutching the bag with the money like a talisman. It was still warm from my lap during the ride. "I'll just rest a bit until Michel comes," I told her. "Sure, dear," Gabrielle said, already half turned away. I settled onto their immaculate guest bed, heart fluttering with anticipation. I imagined the look on Michelle's face when I handed him that envelope. I imagined his arms around me, calling me amazing, saying he'd never forget what I did. But dreams are just that, dreams. Because later that evening, while I sat in their kitchen sipping tepid tea, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I wasn't invisible anymore, not in that moment. I was just in the way. I was still in their kitchen, stirring tea I didn't want with a spoon that clinked far too loud in the silence. Gabrielle was in the living room, talking on the phone, her voice a muted hiss behind the wall. That's when the doorbell rang. Gabrielle didn't budge. She never did when something needed to be done that wasn't about her. So I stood up, bones protesting, knees cracking, and shuffled to the door, my hand trembling just slightly on the knob. A man in a charcoal gray suit stood on the porch, holding a sleek leather folder and a familiar sort of expression. That quiet gravity, like a doctor with a diagnosis, or a pastor come to deliver bad news. "Mrs. Abigail Hartley?" he asked. "Yes?" "My name is Patrick Lemieux. I'm an attorney with Fisher, Lemieux and Rothschild. I'm terribly sorry to inform you that your sister, Mia Bennett, passed away last week." For a moment, I forgot how to stand. The doorway swayed. Mia. We hadn't spoken in 20 years. Not since the fight. Not since she slammed the phone down and screamed that I had chosen Ron over her, that she would never speak to me again. And she didn't. Until now. I didn't know, I said, and realized too late how ridiculous that sounded. Patrick nodded kindly. "She left something for you. May I come in?" Gabrielle finally appeared, arms folded, expression wary. "It's fine," I said before she could speak. "He's here for me." I led Patrick to the kitchen and sat down across from him, the tea cold and forgotten. He opened the leather folder with meticulous care and laid a sealed envelope in front of me. Cream paper. My name written in that unmistakable looping hand. Mia. Next came a cashier's check. I blinked. "This is $200,000, Patrick said. "Cash inheritance. Your sister left instructions for it to be delivered directly to you." I stared. I hadn't even seen her face in 2 decades. I'd assumed she'd disowned me, forgotten me, hated me. And now here she was, crashing back into my life from beyond the grave, with a check and an apology. My fingers were stiff as I opened the letter. "Dearest Abigail, if you are reading this, I've already gone. I doubt you'll cry. I wouldn't blame you. We both have our pride, our faults, our wounds. I spent 20 years angry at you. Angry that you chose a life I didn't understand. Angry that you didn't fight for us the way I thought you should have. But the truth, Abby? I was wrong. I lived waiting to forgive, to be forgiven, waiting for the right time to say I was sorry. It never came. And now I'm dead, and all I can do is write this letter and leave you what I've managed to save. Don't live like I did. Don't wait for someone else to see you or love you or remember you. Take this money, Abby. Not for bills, not for Michelle, not for Gabrielle's new kitchen. Take it and buy your freedom. Buy a ticket. Buy a cottage. Buy silence, if that's what you need. Just make sure it belongs to you. You were always the brave one. I envied that. Forgive me. With love, Mia. My hands shook as I lowered the letter. I didn't cry because Mia was dead. I cried because for the first time in years I felt seen. I felt remembered. I felt like I mattered to someone who didn't want anything from me. Not pity, not money, not favors, just forgiveness. The tears came hot and full, not soft and ladylike, but raw and unfiltered, the kind that come from deep places. I hadn't cried like that for Ron, not even for myself. Gabrielle hovered in the doorway, watching me like I'd gone mad. I didn't care. $200,000 and a letter. That was more than Michelle had given me in 20 years of motherhood. I looked down at the envelope in my lap, the second fortune in one handbag, Ron always used to say, when a woman has her own money, she has choices. And for the first time in a long time, I had both. Choices. And something that felt very much like power. The check sat on my bedside table for 3 days. I barely slept. I couldn't eat. My mind ran like an old projector, flickering through memories. Michelle in diapers, Michelle sobbing when I left him at kindergarten, Michelle grinning at his high school graduation, but also Michelle sighing when I called, Michelle rolling his eyes when I forgot something, Michelle letting Gabrielle choose a nursing home without even asking me if I wanted that. Still, he was my son. And part of me, the most foolish, the most stubborn, still wanted to believe I mattered to him. I didn't want to tell him over the phone. I wasn't going to say, "Guess what, darling? Your estranged aunt died and left me $200,000. Isn't that something?" Number. If I was going to do this, I needed to see him, look him in the eyes, see if there was anything left of the boy who once clutched my hand at the doctor's office and said, "Don't let go, Mama." I made a decision. I would go to Michelle's house with the money, quietly. No announcement, no dramatic reveal. And if I saw something real in him, something sincere, I would give him half. But if I saw the same cold calculations I'd seen too many times before, then I'd know. I'd finally know. I didn't trust banks with this, not for this. I knew what I was doing was old-fashioned, possibly dangerous. But the thought of wiring the money or having some stranger in a suit explain it to Michelle made my stomach twist. This wasn't a transaction. This was a test of love. So I pulled my old suitcase down from the closet. It was scuffed leather, the kind Ron used on our honeymoon. The inside smelled faintly of cedar and dust and old perfume. In the bottom, beneath the faded lining, was a false panel, a secret compartment Ron had added long ago, back when we traveled through countries where keeping things safe meant being clever. I placed the cashier's check inside first. Then, 2 thick envelopes of cash I had quietly withdrawn from my own savings over the years. Ron's money, really, untouched, nearly $100,000 in bills. I tucked it all in with the care of a museum curator, folded the lining back down, zipped it shut. There. No one looking would know the suitcase held anything more than pajamas and support stockings. The next morning, I checked myself in the mirror twice. I wore the same soft wool coat I'd bought 20 years ago in Montreal, the one Ron said made me look like a lady who knows her worth. My hair was brushed. My lipstick was on. I looked not young, but not invisible either. The cab ride to the train station was quiet. I didn't tell the driver what I was carrying. I clutched the suitcase like a lifeline. When I sat down in the train car, I placed it on my lap and kept one hand on it the entire ride. My heart was pounding the whole journey. I kept expecting something to go wrong, for someone to bump into me and guess, for someone to try to take it, for the universe to punish me for daring to hope. At one point, I thought I'd lost the check. I couldn't find it when I peeked into the lining. I felt sweat bead at the back of my neck and my hands tremble. But it was there, just slipped sideways in the secret compartment, still safe. I exhaled so hard the woman across from me looked up in concern. I smiled. "Just a long journey, dear," I told her. When the train pulled into Michelle's town, I hesitated. Should I call him now? Tell him I was here? But I didn't. I wasn't ready. I needed to see the house first, needed to feel the air outside the station, needed to walk with the suitcase beside me, heavy and full of a sister's apology and a mother's final attempt. I found a motel near his neighborhood, cheap, clean, and discreet. I didn't unpack. That night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the suitcase. It wasn't just money in there. It was a question I'd been asking my whole life. Would my son choose me? The next morning, I stood outside Michelle's front door, suitcase in hand and nerves clanging inside me like bells. I'd called him from the motel just after sunrise. My voice had sounded steady. I don't know how. Michelle, darling, I'm in town. I thought I'd stop by for a visit if it's not too much trouble. There was a pause, long enough to sting. Then his voice came back, a little too cheery. Mom, wow, that's unexpected, of course. Yes, come by. Gabrielle will be thrilled. I could hear the effort behind every word, and yet part of me still hoped. The house was large, far larger than the modest home where he was raised. New construction, all sleek lines and oversized windows, glossy white panels, and a black door that looked like it had never been knocked on. Gabrielle answered with a wide smile that didn't touch her eyes. Abigail, what a surprise! Her lipstick was flawless, her tone carefully upbeat. Come in. You didn't tell us you were visiting. I didn't want to impose, I replied, stepping inside. The suitcase bumped over the threshold, heavy and discreet. Michelle appeared from the hallway in a navy sweater and slacks that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He gave me a hug, brief, performative, and said, You look good, Mom. Really good. I gave him the same smile I'd given him on his first day of school, the one that said, I'm pretending too, just for you. The house gleamed. Polished floors, cold marble countertops, glass everything. It looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, but it didn't feel like a home. Too quiet, too clean, too curated. I followed Gabrielle into the living room, where a fire flickered in a built-in gas fixture that gave off no warmth. Above the fireplace, a series of family photos in ornate silver frames graced the mantel. Gabrielle and Michelle at their wedding, Gabrielle and Michelle in Santorini, Gabrielle with her mother at some gala, Michelle with her father on a golf course, even their Labrador Winston in a Christmas sweater, but not one photo of me, not one of Ron. I stared at the blank spaces where we should have been and felt the silence fill in the rest. Shall we sit? Gabrielle asked, gesturing to an off-white sectional that looked like it had never known a stain. Dinner was already cooking, some herb-roasted chicken that smelled nice but faintly artificial, like it came from a box with directions. We made small talk over appetizers. Michelle asked about the nursing home. Gabrielle complimented my coat. I asked about work, about their dog, about whether they'd taken any more trips. Nothing exciting, Gabrielle said, sipping her wine. We're redoing the kitchen again next month. The backsplash feels dated. It was renovated last year, Michelle muttered. Gabrielle shot him a look. Design evolves. I pretended not to notice, but I did. During the lull before dinner, Gabrielle glanced over her wine glass and asked, far too sweetly, By the way, Abigail, how did you manage this trip? I thought Willow Pines was a full-time care facility. I smiled politely. It is, but I'm not a prisoner there, dear. Oh, of course, she said quickly, though her eyes narrowed just slightly. It's just a bit far, isn't it? And you're here on your own? Called a cab, took the train, walked from the station. I may be 75, Gabrielle, but I'm not made of glass. Michelle gave an awkward chuckle, but he didn't defend me. He never did when Gabrielle danced that line between fake kindness and veiled condescension. Seems like a lot of effort just to pop by, she added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Not that we're not thrilled. Oh, it's not a pop-in, I said, my voice gentle. I came for something very specific. And I let that hang in the air, just long enough to watch their expressions shift. The suitcase still sat in the hallway, unopened, heavy with the weight of both money and truth. Neither of them had asked about it yet, but they would. Over dinner, the conversation remained shallow. No mention of Ron. No mention of my birthday, which they'd both forgotten last month. No curiosity about why I was really there. But there was something else I noticed too. Something more subtle. Tension. Gabrielle's smiles cracked when she thought no one was watching. Michelle flinched slightly when she cut him off mid-sentence. They laughed too loudly, complimented each other too perfectly. It felt like watching actors mid-rehearsal, lines memorized, emotion absent. At one point, Gabrielle excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Michelle and me alone at the table. He looked tired, not physically, but tired in his bones, the way Ron looked in the weeks after his father died. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked softly. He looked at me for a moment, that same pause I remembered from when he was 5 and trying to decide whether to tell me about the broken vase. "Sure," he said, "just work stress." But his eyes said otherwise. He didn't ask why I was there, didn't ask about the suitcase I'd left in the hallway, and I began to wonder if he hadn't noticed, or if he had, and was hoping I'd open it and explain what I came to offer, because that's how Michelle had learned to wait, long enough for someone else to say the hard thing first. I folded my napkin slowly and glanced once more at the mantel. The past had been erased, but the present was crumbling beneath their curated silence, and I wasn't sure if I had come to offer help or to witness the ruins. That night, I lay awake in the guest bed, the sterile luxury of Gabrielle's decorative linens doing little to comfort me. The sheets were crisp, the duvet pristine, but nothing about the room felt warm or lived in. No scuff marks on the baseboards, no books on the nightstand, just tasteful emptiness. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint creaks of the settling house. It was just past midnight when I heard it, voices drifting down the hall. At first I thought it might be the television, but no, the cadence was wrong, whispered, urgent. I sat up, heart thudding against my ribs. I pushed back the duvet and stepped into my slippers. The hallway was dark, the only light spilling from the crack beneath the kitchen door. I crept forward, years of motherhood teaching me how to move silently when eavesdropping on secrets. She just showed up. What was I supposed to do? Michelle's voice, tense, frustrated. Gabrielle responded with a sharpness that made me flinch. "You were supposed to say no, Michelle. We've talked about this. We can't afford surprises. Not now." There was the sound of a chair scraping. "She's my mother," Michelle said, but it sounded more like a defense than a declaration. Gabrielle let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. Since when do you play the dutiful son? You visit her, 4 times a year? She could be dead for weeks and no one would notice." My breath caught. I backed up a step but stayed. "That's not fair," Michelle said quietly. "Fair?" she snapped. "You know what's not fair? The mortgage is 2 months behind. My credit card bill is maxed. And you think now is a great time to host a 75-year-old liability with no income and a suitcase full of God knows what?" Suitcase. So she'd noticed it. Michelle said nothing. Gabrielle continued, voice lower now but no less sharp. "She's not here just to visit. People like that don't just show up. She wants something." "She said she came for something specific," Michelle admitted. "Exactly. And whatever it is, we can't give it." I felt cold all over. I turned and slipped back into my room, easing the door shut with trembling fingers. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase by the closet. Still closed, still unopened, still mine. The next morning, they were back to performance. Gabrielle served artisanal toast and Michelle poured fresh pressed juice. But their smiles were too wide, their gestures too rehearsed. They were trying and failing to cover the cracks. After lunch, they left for a quick errand. Gabrielle insisted I relax and watch something on their flat screen. I smiled and nodded. As soon as the car pulled out of the driveway, I made my way upstairs. I wasn't snooping, I told myself. I was confirming, protecting myself. Michelle's office was meticulously organized, not a paper out of place, shelves lined with framed degrees and family photos. Again, none of me or Ron. I opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the one labeled personal. That's where I found them, stacks of letters with bold red lettering. Final notice, past due, overdrawn. The mortgage statement showed 2 missed payments. The kitchen remodel, funded by a high-interest loan Gabrielle had signed without Michelle. Her signature looped across dozens of papers. Another folder held her personal credit report. It was a minefield, maxed out cards, collections agencies, shopping accounts in default. There were notes in Michelle's handwriting, numbers, calculations. A desperate attempt to rearrange deck chairs on a sinking ship. I stood there for a long time, holding those pages. So this was the truth. They weren't thriving. They were drowning. And I, the old mother in the guest room, had arrived like a ghost carrying salvation in an old leather suitcase. Except they didn't want me. They wanted it. I returned everything exactly as I found it. Closed the drawer, smoothed the carpet where my footprints might show. Back in the guest room, I sat beside the suitcase. My hand rested on the handle. I could still hear Gabrielle's voice from the night before, slicing through the dark. People like that don't just show up. She wants something. But she was wrong. I didn't come to take. I came to give. And now I wasn't sure they deserved it. The following night, I stayed awake on purpose. Sleep was a stranger I had no desire to meet. I lay beneath the stiff covers, my eyes fixed on the slow whirl of the ceiling fan above me. Every rotation felt like a countdown. I didn't blink. I didn't move. My breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the fan blades, but inside, I was a storm of thunder and dread. I had come to this house with hope in one pocket and legacy in the other, but I had found facades, tension, and silence wrapped in civility, and still I had to know. How deep did it go? How dark? By 10 o'clock, the house quieted, a silence too complete to be peaceful. I waited another hour, letting the shadows settle, watching the digital clock bleed red numbers into the night. Then, just as I had feared and expected, I heard them. Voices, low, urgent, coming from the kitchen. I slipped from the bed. The house was a museum of expensive quiet. Nothing creaked. Nothing betrayed me. I padded down the hallway in my slippers, each step soft but deliberate. I didn't need to get close this time. The venom in Gabrielle's voice carried. Michelle, we have to find out what she's hiding. She didn't come here for nothing. Michelle murmured something indistinct. I'm serious. Old people like that always squirrel something away. What if she has savings? An inheritance? She might have a nest egg we don't know about. Why else would she travel all the way here by herself? Michelle sighed, tired and subdued. She's never mentioned anything. You know her. She never even let me see her checkbook when I was a kid. Exactly, Gabrielle snapped. That's what makes it suspicious. People don't just travel with an old suitcase and no reason. I saw how she held onto it when she came in, like it was a baby or a bank. A pause, heavy with implication. What do you want me to do? Michelle asked, voice thin. Gabrielle's response came sharp, each word slicing. Lie to her, say we're expecting a baby, or that I'm ill. Something that makes her feel like she has to help us. Guilt works best on her type. There was a silence so long I thought Michelle might say no, might get up, walk away, and put an end to this vile suggestion. But he didn't. When he finally spoke, it was barely audible. Would she believe it? My breath caught. Gabrielle didn't miss a beat. Of course she would. She wants to believe she still matters, that she can save us. All you have to do is cry a little, say you don't know what to do, that we're scared. She'll eat it up. Another pause. Then she added, more quietly, more cruelly, and once she hands it over, we move her out. What do you mean? Michelle asked, wary. I mean, we look into state care. Real long-term. Not some cozy little place with watercolor classes and bird feeders. We say it's what's best. She's not exactly thriving in that home she came from, is she? Michelle didn't speak. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just let the silence answer for him. And that silence screamed louder than any betrayal I had ever known. I backed away from the door, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. My hands were ice. My knees barely held me. I returned to the guest room and shut the door softly behind me. The walls seemed to close in. The stillness around me felt menacing. I sat in the armchair and stared at the suitcase. It had once been a symbol of hope, of generosity, of a last chance at healing. Now it was a vault, and I was a target. I thought of Ron, of the way he used to rest his hand on my shoulder when I worried too much, of how we used to whisper our fears in the dark, sharing the weight so neither had to carry it alone. And I thought of the boy Michelle once was, the child who wrote me Mother's Day cards in crooked handwriting, who cried when I missed one of his school plays, who used to say I was the strongest woman in the world. Where had he gone? What had this house, this woman, this life done to him? It wasn't just Gabrielle's plan that cut deep, it was Michelle's silence, the quiet consent of a son who no longer stood between his mother and harm. They didn't see me anymore, not as a woman, not as a mother, just a means to an end. And I knew then. I would not give them what they wanted. They could fake their need, but I would not fake my forgiveness. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The very air inside that house felt tainted, as if every molecule carried Gabrielle's contempt and Michelle's cowardice. The beautiful walls that once impressed me now loomed like silent judges, whispering of deception. The silence was unbearable, not the peaceful kind that invites rest, but the kind that screams truths you're too afraid to speak aloud. At midnight, I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the moon cast pale shadows across the guest room carpet. I thought of Ron, of how he would have handled this, calm, decisive, protective. I thought of the nights we spent talking until dawn, planning Michelle's future, believing in a version of him that, it turned out, never truly existed. By 3 a.m, I knew I couldn't stay. Not one more second in that house where I was viewed as a burden, a source of money, a temporary obstacle. I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I was a transaction. I rose quietly, my movements precise. I dressed in silence, simple slacks, my warmest cardigan, and sturdy shoes. I tucked my purse under my arm and approached the suitcase, my old companion. The leather was worn but strong, the handle cool in my hand. I checked the hidden compartment one last time. The cash, the check, still there, still mine. I held the suitcase for a moment longer, running my hand over its surface. It had carried hope when I arrived. Now it carried only escape. I left the room without turning on a light. The hallway stretched out before me, every step a memory. Here Michelle had run toward me as a child, arms wide. There I had hugged Gabrielle on their engagement night, thinking we were becoming family. Now I was a ghost in their home. I reached the hallway phone, Gabrielle's cherished vintage piece, and dialed for a taxi. I kept my voice low, almost a whisper. "Please, don't ring the bell. Just flash your lights. I'll be outside." The line disconnected with a soft click. I took one last look around. The photo-less mantle, the curated perfection, the absence of love. I opened the front door slowly, the cold air rushing in like a gasp of relief. The taxi was already waiting at the curb, headlights like twin lighthouses guiding me out of darkness. As I stepped outside, suitcase thumping softly against my leg, I paused on the doorstep. I looked back. The house stood silent and grand. It looked exactly the same as when I arrived, but everything had changed. "Goodbye," I whispered, though no one would hear. I slid into the taxi, grateful for the warmth. The driver, a young man with sleepy eyes, glanced at me. "Where to, ma'am?" "Bus station," I said. My voice didn't waver. We drove through empty streets lined with sleeping houses. I watched the world pass, lights blurring through the window like tears I wouldn't shed. I clutched the suitcase in my lap, hand resting on its top, as if Gabrielle's words might still find a way to reach inside and steal what remained. At the station, I paid in cash and bought a one-way ticket heading south. I didn't care where exactly. I just needed miles between me and the betrayal that still echoed in my ears. I found a bench near the edge of the terminal, away from the humming vending machines and flickering fluorescents. I sat there, the suitcase beside me, and let the cold plastic of the bench press into my back. My heart was breaking. Not just for what had happened, but for what I had lost. The illusion that Michelle still saw me, still loved me. That illusion had been shattered, and in its place was something harder, colder. I had spent 75 years giving, loving, waiting. But love, I now understood, doesn't always come back. Sometimes it just disappears, like the faces that once filled photo albums but never made it onto Michelle's mantle. When the bus finally arrived, I boarded without looking back. I chose a seat by the window and placed the suitcase beside me. The hum of the engine soothed something in me. My hand rested on the worn leather handle the whole ride. This journey wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about survival, about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away too freely. Mia's words came back to me then, as clear as the ink on her letter. "Don't wait, take your freedom." And I had. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in decades, I was the one choosing the road ahead. I was done waiting. The bus hissed to a halt in South Bethany just as dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of lavender and gold. I stepped down onto the platform, my legs stiff from the long ride, my hand aching from gripping the suitcase too tightly for too long. The ocean breeze greeted me like an old friend, carrying with it the scent of salt and possibility. I hadn't been here in decades, but the town hadn't changed much. The same tilted benches by the boardwalk, the same faded awning above the corner bakery, and tucked within it all, the one soul I had left to turn to. Lily. She pulled up in a powder blue hatchback that looked like it had stories of its own. She parked slightly crooked, threw open the door, and wrapped me in a hug before I could say a word. Her embrace was warm and unhurried, as if it were picking up right where we had left off. "Abigail," she murmured against my shoulder, "you're safe now." Her hair was shorter, streaked with silver, and her eyes carried the softness of someone who had seen too much but chose to love anyway. We had lost touch after Ron died. A few cards, a phone call on a birthday, then silence. Life drifted us apart as grief tends to do. But when I called her from the bus station, there was no hesitation in her voice. "Come, no questions, just come." And she had meant it. The ride to her house was quiet, the way only real friendship allows. No need to fill the silence with explanations. She drove through sleepy neighborhoods where porches were still strung with last season's fairy lights and mailboxes leaned like old men. Her house sat at the edge of a tree-lined lane, a small white cottage with yellow curtains in every window, as if sunshine had moved in permanently. Ivy curled up the wooden posts of the porch, and wind chimes danced in the breeze. It looked lived in, loved. It looked like the kind of place that wouldn't ask you to explain your sadness. Inside, the air smelled of lavender, lemon, and something freshly baked. Her living room was an inviting mess. Throw blankets draped on mismatched furniture, a stack of crossword puzzles on the coffee table, a sleepy tabby cat curled up in a wicker chair. It wasn't designed for show. It was built for comfort, built for healing. Lily led me to the kitchen where the morning sun streamed through lace curtains, dust motes drifting like quiet dancers. She put the kettle on without a word, then set 2 mugs on the table. Her movements were calm and certain, like she had done this 1,000 times for people who needed mending. When the tea was ready, she placed the mug in front of me, then sat down across the table. She didn't ask anything, just waited. Her eyes said, "Whenever you're ready." And I was. The words spilled out slowly at first, then faster, like water breaking through a dam. I told her about the nursing home, the loneliness that settled in my bones like dust. I told her about Mia's letter, the inheritance, the suitcase. I told her about Michel, the boy he was and the man he had become. I described Gabrielle in exact detail, her perfect smile, her icy voice, the way she made me feel like something expired. And then I told her about the late-night whispers, the plan to manipulate me, The idea of putting me in a state-run facility to save money. Lily didn't interrupt once. Her face remained calm, but her knuckles whitened around her teacup. She let me empty every corner of my soul, and when I was finally spent, when my voice was hoarse and my eyes dry from the lack of tears, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You were never the problem, Abigail," she said quietly. "You were the gift they never deserved." That simple truth hit harder than any insult or betrayal. I looked down at my hands. I don't know what to do next. I have this money, no plan, no home, just this suitcase and a heart that's forgotten how to trust. Lily squeezed my hand gently. "Then let's start there, with what's real, with what you do have. You're here, you're safe, and you're not alone. We'll figure out the rest. Together." The word together settled over me like a warm blanket. Later that morning, I sat in her garden with a second cup of tea, watching hummingbirds dart between rose bushes. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest dulled. I didn't know what tomorrow held, but today I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a burden. I was Abigail, a woman who had lost nearly everything and still had something to begin with. The next morning arrived wrapped in a gentle rain, the kind that soothes rather than soaks, a reminder that even the skies can cleanse themselves. It tapped softly on Lily's windows like a lullaby for the restless. I woke wrapped in the scent of cinnamon and coffee, carried through the house on warm air. In the yellow-curtained kitchen, Lily moved with practiced ease, humming an old tune as she set down plates of toast dusted with sugar and butter. "I thought we could use a little sweetness today," she said with a smile. We ate in silence at first, a comfortable silence. I sipped my coffee and looked out the window, watching the rain trail lazy patterns on the glass. It was the kind of morning I used to dream of when I lay awake at golden years, trying to remember what peace felt like. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Lily wiped her hands on a towel and gave me a knowing smile. "That'll be Susan and Edie. I told them you'd be here." I started to ask who they were, but before I could, two women stepped into the kitchen as though they had always belonged there. Susan, tall and elegant, with silver-streaked black hair and a bold floral scarf knotted around her neck, kissed me on both cheeks like a European aunt. Edie followed, her sturdy frame wrapped in a patchwork cardigan, eyes bright with sharp curiosity. "So you're Abigail," Susan said, settling into a chair. Her voice was honey over gravel, soothing yet strong. "We've been waiting to meet you." Edie took my hand in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding. Any woman who walks out of betrayal with her dignity and a suitcase is a woman we want in our corner. Their words stunned me. I laughed, a choked, joyful sound I hadn't made in weeks. The kind of laugh that reminds you you're still human, still worthy of joy. We gathered around Lily's table, 4 women, 4 mugs, and a plate of toast now replenished with jam and thick slices of buttered bread. The storm outside grew louder, but in that kitchen, it only made us draw closer. I told my story again. This time, my voice didn't tremble. I told them about Willow Pines, about Mia's letter, about the suitcase filled with inheritance and intention. I spoke of Michelle and Gabrielle, of the late-night whispers that tore the ground from under me. They listened, not just politely, but deeply, with the kind of attention that makes a woman feel seen. Susan shook her head, fury smoldering beneath her graceful demeanor. "That girl's a vulture. And your son, he let it happen." Edie's eyes narrowed. "I know people like Gabriel. They dress betrayal in silk and expect applause." When I was finished, I felt drained but lighter. The truth had settled into the room like another guest at the table. Edie leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You're not going back to golden years. That place is just another gilded cage." Susan nodded. "There are better homes. My niece runs one. Quiet, welcoming, real care. Not a place to die, but a place to live. And more importantly, you'll have your own space, your privacy. And safety," Lily added softly. "No one to circle you like sharks." They began sketching a plan like generals preparing for battle. Edie pulled out her phone and began calling contacts. Susan opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lily fetched a notebook and started listing possible locations, notes in the margins about staff reputations and activity programs. I sat back and watched them work. This was power. Not loud, not domineering, but quiet, relentless, and utterly loving. They asked me nothing I wasn't ready to give. They offered everything they had. At one point, Edie looked up and said, "You get to decide what your life looks like from here, Abigail. And you don't owe anyone your suffering." I felt something deep inside shift, a reclaiming. By the time the rain eased into mist and the sun returned in soft patches through the window, we had a plan. I hadn't chosen a home yet, but I knew I wouldn't return to the one that treated me like cargo. I wouldn't let guilt drive me anymore. And I wasn't alone. I was no longer just a mother or a widow or a woman with a suitcase. I was part of something again, a circle, a council of women who had lived and refused to be broken. The message came through Lily 2 days later. Michelle wanted to see me. I read it 3 times before I answered. Even then, it was only a nod and a quiet, "I'll think about it." The thought of facing him again stirred a storm in me. My heart, still raw from the betrayal, recoiled at the idea. But the women, Lily, Susan, Edie, they reminded me gently that this meeting wasn't for him. It was for me, to reclaim my voice, to draw the line with ink that wouldn't fade. So I agreed. 1 hour, in a public place, a cafe near the ocean where the waves would be my witness. Lily insisted on driving me. She waited in the parking lot, hands curled around a travel mug, ready in case I needed to flee. Michelle was already inside. He looked smaller than I remembered, hunched over a chipped coffee cup at a corner table. His shoulders were tense, his eyes tired. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly, hands shoved into the pockets of his navy coat. "Mom," he said softly, almost reverently, as if I might vanish if he spoke too loud. I didn't respond. I simply sat across from him. The table between us felt wider than any ocean. The waiter approached, but neither of us ordered. Michelle cleared his throat. "First, I need to say I'm sorry. I never should have let Gabrielle talk like that. I didn't know she was planning anything so cruel. I froze. I should have defended you." He looked at me then, eyes pleading. "I know that." I stared at him. I could see the boy he used to be, hiding behind the man he had become. "You didn't just freeze," I said evenly. "You disappeared." He blinked. I know what you meant, Michelle," I interrupted, calm but cold. "But your intentions don't erase your actions." He sagged in his chair. "Things have been hard, financially. We've made mistakes. Gabrielle's been under pressure. I haven't been honest about any of it. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "You were trying to use me. That's worse." He flinched, his mouth tightening. "You let your wife plot to lie to me," I continued. "You sat there while she discussed fabricating illnesses and babies. You listened while she talked about sending me to a state facility like I was an expired product. And you said nothing." "I know," he whispered, tears springing to his eyes. "I know I failed you." I opened my purse and drew out a folded piece of paper. I set it on the table, slid it toward him. "My conditions," I said. "If you want to be part of my life again, this is where it begins, and where it ends if you break them." His hands trembled as he unfolded the note. No contact with Gabrielle. No questions about my money. Visits by invitation only. Full honesty always. He read it twice, then looked up. "I can do this," he said. "I want to do this." "Words aren't enough anymore," I replied. "If you want my trust, you'll have to earn it. Not with apologies, with time, with consistency." He nodded, but the question was still in his eyes. "And the money?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "The money isn't your salvation, Michelle. It's not a shortcut to redemption. It was a gift meant for love, not desperation, not guilt, and certainly not Gabrielle." He lowered his head. I watched as his shoulders slumped under the weight of understanding. I loved you so fiercely, I whispered, more to myself than him. I wanted to believe you would protect me like I once protected you, but now I protect myself. I stood, slowly and deliberately. Goodbye, Michelle. Maybe not forever, but for now. He didn't try to stop me. Outside, the sea breeze met me like a benediction. Lily waited in the car, engine humming, radio murmuring an old Ella Fitzgerald song. She looked at me, saw my face, and said nothing. Just reached across the console and took my hand. We drove home in silence, my soul settling with every mile. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had lost a son. I felt like I had reclaimed a self. It began slowly, like the tide creeping in after a long storm. A month after my final meeting with Michelle, I moved into my new home, a retirement residence perched on a gentle cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The building was modest but filled with light, not the artificial kind that buzzed overhead at golden years, but real light. Sunrises spilling across polished wood floors, the soft orange blush of evening soaking the white walls. Outside my window, waves rolled in and out in a rhythm that calmed something deep inside me. The room was mine entirely. A single bed with a hand-stitched quilt, a bookshelf I stocked with secondhand novels, a small armchair I rescued from a thrift store that still smelled faintly of cedar, a window seat with cushions that invited long afternoons of nothing but looking out at the sea. There was dignity here, autonomy. No one knocked without asking. No one raised their voice. I had space to breathe. The staff called me Mrs. Carson at first, until I gently insisted on Abigail. The other residents welcomed me without hesitation. Ruth, a former librarian, lived down the hall and quoted poetry in our morning walks. Martin, a retired pianist, played Debussy in the common room every Wednesday. They didn't care about my past or why I was there. They wanted to know what I liked to read, if I preferred chamomile or Earl Grey, if I'd join them for puzzle night. I found myself again in little things, painting in the sunroom, joining a book club, planting herbs in the garden beds. The lavender I nurtured began to thrive, and so did I. One afternoon, as I was sketching in my journal, the phone rang. I recognized the number. Michelle. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice too casual, too rehearsed. "Just wanted to check in. How's the new place?" I told him the truth. It was peaceful, beautiful, filled with people who made me laugh. He made a few hesitant comments, asked about the food, the weather, then came the familiar pause. "I hate to ask," he said, clearing his throat, "but things have been tight. Gabrielle's been out of work again, and we're behind on a couple of things. Nothing huge. Just wondering if you might be able to help out." "Just a little?" My grip on the phone didn't tighten. My heart didn't race. "No, Michelle," I said evenly. "I can't do that." There was silence on the line, the kind that used to break me. Not anymore. "Oh, okay," he said. "Just thought I'd ask." We hung up a minute later. Our conversation ended with the kind of awkward politeness that strangers use. He called again a week later, and again after that, each time the same script: small talk, hesitation, a soft request. The first time, I declined gently. The second time, I was firm. The third time, I let it go to voicemail, because I had finally learned I didn't owe anyone more than I was willing to give. Not explanations, not comfort, not money. I had spent my life loving deeply, sacrificing without question. But here, in this quiet home above the sea, I was learning a different kind of love, the love I gave to myself. On clear evenings, I sat on the balcony outside the common room, wrapped in a shawl, watching the waves glisten under the moonlight. Around me, laughter drifted from inside, friends playing cards, clinking teacups, a soft hum of life continuing. I was not waiting anymore, not for visits, not for apologies, not for love to return in the shape I once knew. I had made a home, a community, a life. And every morning, when the sun reached across the water to warm my face, I knew I had chosen well. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon, just as Abigail was finishing a watercolor sketch of the ocean from her balcony. The waves rolled gently in the distance, and the salt-laced breeze carried the quiet serenity she'd come to cherish. The phone buzzed on the small table beside her. She glanced at the screen and her breath caught. Michelle. For a moment, she simply stared at the name, her fingers hovering. Then, with a sigh, she picked up. "Hi, Mom," came the familiar voice, but this time it was different, softer, lacking the usual polished confidence. "I hope it's a good time." Abigail placed her brush down and leaned back in her chair. "Go ahead, Michelle." There was a long pause, and then the dam broke. "Gabrielle and it's over. We split up last week." Abigail said nothing. She waited, allowing the silence to fill the space he usually dominated. "She said some things I can't forget," he continued, his voice faltering. "I said some things I regret. A lot of things came up, resentments, anger, things we buried for too long. It's not important now. What matters is I'm thinking of moving. Maybe to the coast, closer to you. I could use some support." "I miss you, Mom." His words came out half-rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in front of a mirror. There was desperation in his voice, but it didn't ring entirely true. It was the tone of a man who'd run out of options, not a son who longed for his mother. "I see," Abigail said calmly. The tide murmured in the distance, offering her strength. "I've made mistakes," Michelle said. "Big ones. I know that. I was blind to Gabrielle's influence. I let things get out of hand. But I'm trying to fix that now. I thought maybe we could talk, spend some time together, like we used to." Abigail's gaze drifted to the open sea. 100 memories flooded her. Nights alone in a sterile nursing home, ignored phone calls, Gabrielle's cold voice whispering poison, and Michelle's silence as her son. Could a person change so quickly? Or was this just another mask, another attempt to circle back now that his golden ladder had been pulled out from under him? "I'm getting ready to travel," she said at last. "Travel?" he repeated, confused. "Yes, Italy, a dream your father and I had for years. We never got the chance." "Wait, really?" He sounded genuinely shocked. "But I thought, you said you were settled in." "I've settled into myself, Michelle, into a life I'm building, not one I'm apologizing for." He was silent for a moment, then a quieter voice. "I didn't know you were thinking about Italy." "There's a lot you didn't know," she replied, "and a lot you didn't ask." "I'm trying, Mom," he said. "I want to make things right." Abigail sat up straighter, her fingers brushing the edge of her sketchbook. "Then don't tell me," she said evenly. "Show me. If you want to be part of my life, prove it. With actions, not empty promises." He didn't respond right away. She imagined him chewing on his lip, unsure of what to say when manipulation failed. "Okay," he said at last. "Okay, I'll try." "I wish you well," she said, "but I'm not putting my life on hold anymore. Not for anyone." They hung up soon after. No emotional declarations, no weeping reconciliation, just a quiet click and the return of the sea's steady rhythm. Abigail returned to her watercolor. The paint had dried slightly, but the color still moved beneath her brush. She added a bold line of blue to the edge of the waves, then sat back and admired her work. She had always believed life would come back to her through family, through sacrifice, through waiting. But now, she understood something different, something her friends had helped her see. She wasn't bound to the past. She wasn't beholden to a son who only came around when he needed something. She had a future to live, and Italy was waiting. Her suitcase stood in the corner, half-packed. In a few days, she and Lily, Susan, and Edie would board a plane. They had already mapped out the trip: Rome, Florence, Venice. They would sip wine under the Tuscan sun, laugh too loudly in museums, and wander through old streets where no one knew their names, but where they would be fully themselves. For the first time, Abigail wasn't playing a role. She was living. The truth settled in like dust on the windowsill, quiet, inevitable, and unmoved by sentiment. It had been Edie who confirmed it, a few days after Michelle's call. Her friend Nancy, who still worked in town at the florist's near Gabrielle's office, had seen Gabrielle and Michelle together at a dinner party that very weekend. They weren't just polite or cordial, they were radiant, laughing, leaning into each other, holding hands like newlyweds. Nancy had taken a photo, a wide shot of the room with guests and string lights, and there they were in the background, unmistakable. Edie had hesitated to show Abigail, unsure how she would take it. But Abigail had simply studied the image, her lips in a thin line, and then handed the phone back without a word. At first, she didn't react. She thanked Edie for telling her, walked to her room, and sat down with a cup of tea still warm in her hands. The ocean glimmered beyond the glass. A softness settled over her, not rage, not heartbreak, but something gentler, a kind of solemn mourning for the version of Michelle she'd once believed in. So it had all been a lie, the remorse, the talk of separation, the plan to move closer, a carefully designed performance aimed at earning sympathy and, more likely, her money. Michelle hadn't changed. He hadn't grown. He had simply learned to mask his intentions in a new tone. But she didn't cry. She didn't curse or tear up his photographs. Her disappointment was a dull ache she carried quietly, like an old wound that no longer bled. There was nothing left to rage against. There was only release. She had lived for someone else for so long, for Ron, for Michelle, for the idea of being loved by those she loved unconditionally. She had twisted herself into versions they could use, nurturing, supportive, forgiving, available, and they had taken from her until she was spent. But those days were over. She walked to her desk, sat down, and wrote a letter. Her hand didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. Michelle, I know the truth. I'm not angry, just tired. I wish you clarity, not comfort. And if you ever truly wish to reconnect, you'll need to do more than pretend. I am no longer someone's opportunity. I am someone with a life of her own. Mom. She folded the letter, tucked it into the back of her sketchbook, and turned back to her painting of the Tuscan hills. The vineyards curved beneath soft brushstrokes, and in the corner of the canvas she added two figures walking into the distance, hand in hand. They weren't Michelle and Gabriel. They weren't even real. They were her and Ron, in the world they had once dreamed of. A world she would finally touch. Her passport was ready. The tickets were booked. The Women's Council had rented a villa with ochre walls and green shutters. Lily was memorizing polite Italian phrases and practicing with Duolingo each night. Susan had mapped out art galleries and wine tastings. Edie, who claimed she hated flying, had secretly bought new shoes and a sun hat that she kept calling her Roman crown. They would dance in courtyards, drink espresso in tiny cups, laugh in the narrow streets of Florence, and cry in the cathedrals of Rome. Abigail would write in her journal under cypress trees and press olive leaves between the pages. And Michelle would always be her son. That truth wouldn't change, but she had stopped hoping he would be someone else. He would be a memory, a chapter in her book, not the ending. She had changed the ending, and the next chapter would be written in her own hand, in a land of beauty, color, and light.